Hi, everyone. This is Dale Branda with Steward Advisors. Welcome to today's webinar. So our moderator today is Mike Kwan. Mike's a principal with Steward Advisors, and he has over 30 years experience in the financial services industry. For the past 8 years, Mike's been a comprehensive financial planner, which means he shares strategies for helping people preserve wealth and makes recommendations and provides insights around portfolio management. And he offers all sorts of other customized advice to individuals and families. And so with that said, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mike and our panel of experts.
Thanks, Dale. Our webinar will be focused on practical family applications in dealing with aging adults with diminishing health. It will not focus on financing arrangement. If there's sufficient interest, a future Steward webinar can address finances for aging adults. We hope to live a long, healthy life. However, as we age, we expect that our health will decline. There are various diminishing health scenarios that can occur. The questions become, what's the best thing to do when the ability of taking care of oneself independently and safely is a growing concern or a critical issue? We have a panel of 3 esteemed senior professionals, each is an aging expert, to help address what you want to know and should consider. Let's meet today's panel members. First is Mary Kay Furiasi. Mary Kay is the founding attorney of AZ Health and Elder Law, a life care planning law firm. Mary Kay and her team deliver legal services, care coordination, and advocacy services to help elderly clients and their families navigate the health, care, and long-term care maze. As a former nurse, she and her staff, social worker, add as an alternative to the traditional asset-focused elder law. Mary Kay has been working with aging adults for 30 years and is an advocate for quality care for elders. She is dedicated to raising public awareness about the physical, financial, and legal implications resulting from aging. Next, we have Colleen Bay Bekvar, who co-founded the Trinity Advocacy Group and has 26 years experience in her field. Colleen is a gerontologist and has multiple geriatric care managers on staff. She helps guide people through difficult transitions, and Colleen can serve as a third-party guardian, executor, power of attorney, and help with elder mediation. Mary Kay and Colleen also co-founded an aging adult resource team designed to bring one-stop services for complete professional resources to help guide adult children and their parents in making better informed decisions. It's called Aging Care Solutions Team Network. And finally, our third panelist is Sue Judson. Sue is an education coordinator with Journey Care, a non-for-profit hospice resource, bringing compassionate care to people suffering with pain through palliative and hospice care services. In her role as education coordinator, she's educated both healthcare professionals and community members about end-of-life issues. For the past 9 years, Sue has been an advocate for encouraging open dialogue between both family members and healthcare providers to navigate the options available to ensure comfort for their loved ones and patients. Welcome all 3 of you to our Ask the Experts panel. So I'm going to start with the mind, and no one can really afford to wait for, well, let's back up just a second here. Memory loss erases the mind and can disrupt daily life. Dementia impacts millions of people in the US and is a growing disease. Unlike heart problems and cancer, which can be remedied or cured at the time of the identified issue, addressing brain problems needs to be done decades beforehand. In fact, up to 20 years before any signs of symptoms, plaque and tangles can begin accumulating in our brain and later cause dementia. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. It accounts for 60 to 80% of cases. Alzheimer's is diagnosed when the brain has already degenerated to dysfunction. And our increasing lifespan, now age 80, is outpacing our health span. Almost a third of people, mostly women, are being impacted by caregiving obligations. So no one can really afford to wait for memory loss signs and symptoms to show in your 60s, 70s, and 80s because it'll be too late. Many would say there hasn't been an FDA-approved medication during the past 15 years that does a good job with dealing with memory loss at the time of noticeable symptoms. And plaque and tangles in the brain, like when long hair gets tangled on a windy day, are still an unresolved problem. They over time create brain dysfunction. So the question becomes, what can we do to prevent and reduce memory loss and cognitive abilities? And the answer is early intervention is the key to stopping Alzheimer's forest fire. Neural inflammation is a target to control. There's a TEDx that I saw on YouTube recently called Curing Alzheimer's with Science and Song. It was by Rudy Tanzi, who's a Harvard brain researcher and geneticist. And he basically said, if you do these 4 things, you'll be on a much better path. And there are things that we're aware of today. And he put it in the acronym SLED. So the S is to sleep more and get 8 hours of sleep daily. The L is to learn more, find out what you can do to combat memory loss. And the E stands for exercise more, to try and walk at least 8,000 steps a day and just to keep moving. And the D is in diet, to be on a balanced diet, like the Mediterranean diet, and consume more plant food and stay away from processed foods. And we all know that healthy lifestyles improve cardiovascular health, but it also helps to maintain brain health. So let's turn to our first question. You begin to notice significant physical challenges or mental changes in mom or dad. What's the best thing to do next? Colleen?
Thank you, Mike. So the best thing to do really is to assess the client, assess your loved one, or if you are the person experiencing changes, to get an assessment. And best practice when it comes to an assessment would be talking with a physician. And when you're experiencing those physical changes, as you age, yes, we are more susceptible to chronic disease like arthritis, a variety of conditions. But though those things are considered more common with aging, they are not considered normal aging. So we always want to get ourselves in front of a physician. And when it comes to changes in the aging body that are very different than how a person has aged most of their lives, or cognitive changes, the subspecialty for both of those would be neurological. And so that would be my strong recommendation, is if you're seeing major changes, get a neuro assessment, because those physical changes that a person is experiencing, there's a lot of older adults who experience neurodegenerative disorders, which affects them physically. And then we also have neurocognitive decline, which we all look at as dementia. And that is also more common, as you rightly pointed out, particularly with Alzheimer's disease. And that major risk factor for Alzheimer's disease is age. So that's really the first step, is to get in touch with a neurologist. But I don't think most of us see neurologists. So starting with your own primary care physician is the first step.
And Sue, do you have some thoughts?
Well, I totally agree with Colleen, but even before that is to start a log, start writing down changes that you've seen, how often, when, and then start to have some of those conversations with your loved one in a non-defensive way. I noticed that it's getting a little harder for you to get in and out of the car, or you don't seem to be having as many leftovers, or are you not cooking meals as much? And, how can we support you in those next steps? Sometimes they're very defensive and sometimes they're not. But just to start having conversations, because we really want it to be a team effort between you, your loved one, healthcare physicians, outside, consulting maybe for assessments. I think that that's really, really important. And then to educate yourself. there's so many ways to know, okay, what are the next step options? There is a resource on the last page of Medicare.gov, and they rate different organizations, home health companies for caregiving, physicians, long-term care facilities, hospices, all of that, so that they're very different. And it's a good idea just to kind of do your homework ahead of time so that you can start to share some of that information, because we want your loved one to stay in control and be independent in a safe environment as much as possible.
Okay. Mary Kay, do you have something to add?
Mary Kay,
Mary Kay, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Zoomies, sorry about that. What I was saying is, yes, absolutely agree with what Susan and Colleen have said. A lot of times, from my perspective as being an elder law attorney, I usually get, sometimes people will come to me when they're in that period of they're not quite sure. You know, they're seeing some things and they're not quite sure if there is some cognition problems. So one of the things that I always say is it's kind of a good idea to just kind of look around and if you're visiting their home, are things now all of a sudden not being taken care of? Are they not paying their bills? Are there burnt pots on the stove? Maybe that are an indication of maybe that some things are being left unattended. One of the things that's quite common around our holiday times, not so much this year, but historically and in my area of practice, we tend to get a lot of family calls, a lot of calls around the holiday seasons. That tends to be when family members are visiting their loved ones a little bit more and spending more time rather than just a quick phone call. Hi, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing fine. Everything's okay. You know, actually engaging in conversations. And a lot of times if you spend probably, you know, with my experience as being a former neural nurse, I always tell, you know, at least spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And sometimes those doubts that you are sort of intuitively feeling, that's sometimes when you're going to start seeing that to start to occur. And again, referring to the physicians is always that first, you know, kind of the first step into the door to kind of help you through the medical questions, you know, in that area. So thanks. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, those are really some very helpful insights. Adult children and parents often have different objectives when health has declined and independent living has become uncertain. What's the right and best thing to do next? You know, kids are likely concerned with safety issues and being efficient with the finances, but the aging parent typically wants to maintain their independence. Colleen, would you like to weigh in?
I would love to weigh in. Thanks, Mike. There is this tug of war, right, between the older adults and the well-intended adult children, and even some of our healthcare providers. So the older adult is going to hold on to their independence, which they equate with freedom. And the older adult children or other loved ones are really going to err on the side of safety. And those two things are really very much in conflict with each other sometimes. They don't have to be. Sometimes you can find a compromise, but every day of the week, older adults are going to risk their safety to maintain their freedom. And it's very common. And that is oftentimes where we see conflict arise between generations. The other thing is our healthcare system sometimes, you know, they will restrain or restrict activities in older adults, not so much because the older adult is not able to do some of those things, but because they don't want the liability if that older adult, for example, falls on that person's in that healthcare institution's environment in a hospital or a nursing home. So people are relegated to their beds or to wheelchairs prematurely. Those are some pretty extreme examples of the tug of war between independence and safety. But, you know, the perception sometimes that older adults have about what is available to them is what was available to their parents or to their older adult loved ones. And the really interesting thing is that the fastest growing trend in the aging network, meaning the people that support and serve and offer products and services to older adults, is the home and community-based services network. And so what does that mean? Well, bringing things into the home from the community. And so older adults oftentimes want to remain in their homes. And so that's excellent insofar as now we can bring many more services into the home that just were not available 25 to 30 years ago. Same thing with options for placement. Let's say it is determined that that older adult needs to go into placement and their only mindset is the nursing home. But there has been an enormous growth in assisted living, supportive living, memory care, retirement communities, continuing care retirement communities. And so the older adult is imagining something from their long history and their background, and it may not actually, they're not picturing what is available now, which is much less restrictive than a nursing home. So yeah, that tug of war is real and happens quite a bit.
Thank you, Colleen. Mary Kay, would you like to share?
Oh, absolutely. That's an area that's actually, we work with a lot of situations in that regard. We have, whether it be the son or the daughter or the acting agent under a power of attorney now, kind of questioning whether or not they should be stepping into that role. So one of the things from a legal perspective is we always have to start with who's in charge, you know, kind of that question. And, you know, that's that tug of war. In the legal term, it's, you know, who's in charge in the sense of, you know, does that, that elder person have the capacity to make the proper judgments to keep themselves safe? And if that individual, that elder individual can prove those things and has that capacity, well, of course, they're going to be the decision maker. They're going to be the one in charge. And that is elder law attorneys. We support that and advocate for that. However, on the other side, if we have someone that is obviously maybe not making the best judgments and is exhibiting some cognition problems, then of course, then we're going to work with the family, you know, to get the proper person in charge and making the decisions. So again, for the ultimate safety of the senior. So, you know, it's always a kind of a difficult situation to kind of, you know, work through those situations. And then it kind of goes back to your first question, Mike, where we talk about, you know, what is that level of cognition? What is that level of capacity? So that's going to all be part of this, you know, that determination is all going to be part of kind of the decisions that we make in this next stage.
Thank you, Mary Kay. So I'd like to talk about the timing of conversations. And as kids, we've, you know, looked up to our parents for support and guidance. And that's how we've always viewed mom and dad. But at some point, you know, they can lose functionality and the roles can reverse and the adult child becomes the parent and helps their mom or dad. And, you know, that's really hard for both parties to accept. So how do you best manage that communication, and when's the right time to talk about, you know, this kind of issue with your folks? Sue, would you like to get us started?
Sure, thanks. Obviously, the earlier you start, the better it is. Don't wait until a crisis and then we're all running on emotions instead of objective choices. That's where the education comes in as well, is really know what your options are financially, personal preferences, all of that kind of thing. It's so much easier to talk about these things when emotions aren't flying high. Again, you know, like we've said before, talking to other professionals, your primary care, spiritual advisors, community friends, to speak into this, that they can kind of do the heavy lifting of starting that conversation, so that as a team, then you can kind of just step in and kind of listen and have that discussion. You know, one of the things as far as the right time is to ask them, you know, what would the issues be? What are the triggers to make you think about making a lifestyle change? And if you do that earlier, then your loved one or you, like I'm encouraging you to do this now, however old you are, to start saying, you know, okay, if I can't drive at night anymore, or I don't want to clean the house, or, you know, I'm lonely, those triggers that'll start to get you thinking about getting some more support. So the earlier you start, the better. And that whole physical versus cognitive issue is really huge, because if somebody is very cognitively aware, they might make decisions that you wouldn't make for them if you were making that choice for them.
And Sue, when's the right time to talk about advanced directives? And maybe you can just, you know, define that for our audience as well.
So you'll see Mary Kay, Colleen, and I always saying now. Yesterday was the best time to talk about advanced directives. What is an advanced directive? It's a document that lets people know how you want to be treated and cared for if you are no longer able to speak for yourself. There are many different kinds of advanced directives. The DNR, do not resuscitate, is a form of an advanced directive. I have this right here. We love this, 5 wishes. There's a resource on the back of the page too, but it does a few things. What I think is almost most important is it allows you to select a healthcare agent or a healthcare power of attorney that you trust to make the decisions that you want to make if you can no longer speak for yourself. In this document, it allows you to have a primary and then a couple of alternates in case that person can't do it. But you have to make sure that they agree with carrying out your wishes, even if they don't agree with what those decisions are. Not always the oldest child or the spouse. Sometimes they can't do that. But really, it's so important to set that up now for anyone over the age of 18. What happens if you have a 24-year-old and they're in an accident and you don't have a power of attorney? It's hard for you to get information for them. But especially for parents, you want them to feel comfortable knowing what they want. Then if there's something where they can't speak for themselves, it takes away so many of the arguments that siblings might have for care if it's already documented. In this 5 wishes, it talks about resuscitation, it talks about feeding tubes, a few different things, and you can say, oh, I want it for X amount of time, or I don't want it. And then it also goes into how you want to be cared for. I think, Mike, you talked a little bit at the beginning about music and that YouTube thing that you saw, the TED Talk. Music is the last thing that goes in somebody's memory. And so by playing the kind of music that they want, that soothes them and comforts them, is really a good thing. So that, an advanced directive really talks about who's going to advocate for you, medically, socially, everything. So if you haven't done an advanced directive, I would strongly encourage you and your family to complete one, talk about it, tell everybody. Of course, you can give that to your attorney. That's a good thing, but bring it to your doctors, bring it to your hospital, have them scan everything in so that everybody is clear what kind of care that you want.
Thank you, Sue.
There's my soapbox. I'll tell you, for like hospice, so many times we see families conflicted over the care of their parent during those last 6 months or so of a hospice stay. And we just so wish that they would have had those conversations prior to that, so that they could just spend their time with their loved one, being the son or daughter or the niece or nephew, and enjoying that time that they have instead of fighting over the details.
Yeah, and obviously we're talking about difficult conversations too. So, but you're absolutely right. The sooner that you can have them, the better off everyone's going to be. Mary Kay, obviously these are legal documents, so I'm sure there's some things that you'd like to share about experiences that you've seen.
Yeah, obviously there are legal documents, the particular document that Susan's talking about are what we refer to as powers of attorney for healthcare. And that's all one of the documents that's referred to in that generic term of advanced directives. There's the powers of attorney for healthcare, then there's the living will, and then in Illinois and some of the other states too, now the DNR is now referred to as the POLST, the Provider Order Life Sustaining Treatment. And that's a document where you can kind of get into some of the very specific situations and make choices regarding that. But I want to actually from a again, my soapbox, from as Susan is, again, my background of being as an ICU nurse and having dealt with it from that perspective, in the nursing world and now in the legal world, I'm a strong advocate for my clients to actually have, I will say to them, okay, once we've done these documents and we've executed everything, then I always send them away with homework. I said, the documents really are only as good as the conversations that you have. So there's nothing more frustrating to someone to be in that position and be, the doctor turns to them and says, what would your loved one want? And that poor agent has no idea. So it's a two-step process. There's a really good resource that is helpful for people, and it's really easy. You just Google it. It's called the Conversation Project, and they've done some wonderful work with. They've got videos, they've got worksheets, they've got all types of, it's a wonderful resource to get people talking about this. And this isn't an age-related issue. This is something, these types of things can happen to all of us. And, if we don't have somebody that we've appointed to be able to step in and advocate for us, that's just really unfortunate because this is something that's there. It's easy enough to do. You don't always, the healthcare powers of attorney are really, yes, we'd love to help you, but you don't need us to do those. So again, as an advocate for that, do them. We'd love to help you with them, but again, do them and have the conversations. Those are two very important things to remember. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mary Kay. And it sounds like we should add the Conversation Project to our list of resources as well. So financial elder abuse is the #1 reported abuse. And Colleen, I know we were talking about this as we were preparing for today, and financial abuse exploitation is a big problem. And can I ask you, what's the typical profile of the culprit?
Sure. You are right. Financial elder abuse is the #1 reported abuse, not just here in Illinois, but across the country. And it was very interesting when I was researching financial exploitation for a completely different project. I identified not just the victim profile, which I think is equally important to the perpetrator profile, but to answer your initial question, what is that profile? And I'll have to say I was a little shocked by what the research showed, which is perpetrator profile is primarily male. And that surprised me because, well, let me go through the rest of the factors. So male, family member, is experiencing caregiver stress, has a history of social or mental health problems, and has a clinical history of depression. So the reason why it surprised me that this would be a male is we know that the primary caregiver for not just our older population, but certainly younger populations is primarily the female family member. So it surprised me that male was still one of those major factors that were identified as the primary gender for a perpetrator profile. But I think it's also important to talk about the victim profile. And that victim is usually the recipient, not just of financial exploitation, but of other types of abuse as well. And what that means is, first of all, we have many different types of abuse, financial exploitation being one, but we also have physical abuse, emotional and psychological abuse, sexual abuse, etc. So the recipient of financial exploitation is oftentimes also suffering at the hand of emotional or psychological abuse. Maybe it is that perpetrator who is convincing that older adult that they are responsible for their drug addiction or housing issues or whatever that is. And so they have this person over a barrel. Mary Kay and I are working on a case right now together, where there is an adult female child who has psychologically abused her mom for, as far as we can tell, that we can prove, at least the last handful of years, and took her mom for over $100,000. And now she is, and the way that she kind of cries poor mouth to her mom is, she uses her mom's history of another child that her mom had who sadly committed suicide. And so she oftentimes will bring up that idea that, that happened to my brother, mom, your son. If you don't get me out of this bind, I might just take my own life. So that victim is oftentimes not just being financially exploited, but those heartstrings are being pulled to, or physical abuse. Also, that older adult oftentimes is compromised physically or mentally, and therefore dependent on their abuser for services of some sort, whether it's grocery shopping, bill pay, medication pickup, transportation to and from essential appointments like physicians, worship services, things like that. They oftentimes live alone. They're emotionally very vulnerable and therefore socially isolated. And of course, right now, given the social isolation our whole country has experienced, our whole world has experienced for the last 15 months or more, we see more and more seniors coming forward with reports of abuse. They have a trusting attitude, and I think one of the common denominators for older adults who are being abused is they have a fear of reporting that abuse. And you can imagine why. They are, number one, dependent on that abuser. And so what happens to me, right, if I'm the older adult and I've just turned in the one person that can get me my food or my groceries? The other fear is embarrassment and getting the authorities involved. And anyway, so those are very common. Those are the profiles for both the victim and the perpetrator.
Boy, that's all those are tough things to hear, that you have these families who have become overly dependent and just taking advantage of situations, and that's really difficult to hear. Mary Kay, who should not be appointed power of attorney and why? I mean, obviously, Colleen was just talking about horror stories that we hope would never happen, but they sounds like they frequently do. Can you just share with us your thoughts there?
Absolutely, Mike. What's interesting in the case that Colleen and I were working on is the actual abuser was originally started off as the named agent under her powers of attorney. So she actually, and that's the other thing that's very common in these types of situations, is that they're using the power of attorney for finances to do the abuse. So, that document can be very useful, but it also can be very dangerous in the hands of the wrong person, because essentially you're giving, depending on what's in that document, what kind of rights you have in that, or what kind of powers you've given this person, they can essentially, if it's part of like your whole estate plan, they may be able to go in and undo everything that you wanted to do. So it's very important that it be somebody trustworthy. When I sit down with clients and we go through these types of documents, and my advice when I give them who they should choose, it's sort of like two different. Your healthcare powers of attorney would definitely not be somebody probably different than your financials. It's a different skill set. Unfortunately, a lot of people will just kind of sit there and tick off, especially parents will kind of tick off just like in birth order. And as an attorney that works in this area, I will just kind of talk them through that a little bit and say, no, let's step back a little bit and let's talk about, what kind of skill set that's required for this job, because it's a job. And you want to make sure that it's somebody that you trust. It's somebody that you definitely wouldn't want to put somebody in that position that has a history of poor money management, not able to keep a job, somebody that would always be looking for money. It's definitely not somebody you would want to put. So it's very important to pick that. And in some family situations, you may not have a family member that necessarily you could trust. So it's not always, it's not an automatic that we always go to just family members. Sometimes we need to think outside of that and maybe look to a professional. For example, in this case, Colleen serves as in that role, or, sometimes a bank will do that. So sometimes a professional is your best way to go because it's a fiduciary role. So they have rules, they are subject to laws, as is the person as is the agent under the laws. But again, you have to kind of take them to court. And that's essentially what happened in this case. Colleen and I were working in it, is that the sister, one of her children, brought this before the court to point out, hey, what was going on in this situation. So, it's a really sad situation because mom went through and did all of the documents, but it's a perfect example of where she picked the wrong person. And because that person used those documents for all the wrong reasons. So it's really important that you really trust that person. And then maybe put some safeguards in that document. Maybe require an annual accounting once that agent steps in. Maybe require that for certain transactions over a certain amount, that there have to be 2 signatures. There's some additional safeguards you could put in the document, but your first safeguard, of course, is picking the right person.
Thank you, Mary Kay. Those some good advice there. I'm going to try and change gears here a little bit. When evaluating alternatives to get in-home care or move to a specialized retirement facility capable of taking care of mom or dad, and where the level and quality of care needed and how you're going to pay for it, defines what's realistic. Can you explain a solution with someone or a family with moderate resources to cover 3 to 5 years, and what that might look like, and what are some of the factors to consider? And Colleen, can you start with that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. There are 2 things that drive every care plan. No matter how many resources a person has, no matter how few resources a person has, there are 2 factors. 1, the level of care needed, and 2, the resources to access that care, to pay for that care. So it doesn't matter how much money you have or how little money you have. Those 2 factors open doors and close others. It's no matter the situation. So yeah, that's where you start, is what level of care is needed and how are we going to pay for it. And I'm actually very happy being in Illinois, and more specifically right now in DuPage County, we have our resources, regardless of socioeconomic level, are very, very, we have so many different options for people regardless of socioeconomic level. So that's a good thing. But I know that Mary Kay, so much of what she uses, what she does in her background is helps people access that. So I'll kick it to Mary Kay.
Thanks, Colleen. Yeah, it's funny because when I sit down and I talk with my clients, I do spend some time, and why is an attorney asking me these questions? Well, because it's to Colleen's point, it's so important to know what that level of care is going to be. And so if I have a good understanding of what type of disease we're talking about, none of us have a crystal ball. We can't look into and say, okay, I know that because I have this disease that I've got 3 to 5 years, 10 years, there is no automatic to any of this. So, to Colleen's point about it's okay, if we need this level of care, we want to put together a care plan that is going to be based on using the resources that we have in whatever situation it is, because everybody's going to have different resources and different goals For example, some people may want to use their resources to the utmost extent to keep them in the home, where somebody else may say, well, no, maybe we'll go into an assisted living or another facility, knowing that we may have to transition to more care. So it's really listening to what everyone's goals are and what their plans are, as far as, how do they see this progression of this disease going forward, and also listening to what the person that is actually, if the elder can be a part of this conversation. Of course, we want to make sure that their needs are being attended to. And a lot of times we get the majority of people, when they're in this type of care needing situation, the majority of people are going to want to stay home if they can. So in that situation, we try to work to keep them in home as long as possible, but helping them understand how this progression will go. So again, it's like, okay, here's our pot of money. How can we use this best to make sure that your goals are obtainable? And so sometimes we have to make some hard decisions, going forward, based on that. So it really is, and it's kind of hard, Mike, really to give like just a broad-based explanation that applies to everybody, because it's complicated, and it's very fact specific in each situation. And as Colleen said, it's kind of needs and finances, and then kind of balanced over, goals and that sort of thing, and sometimes you can get a lot more, if someone wants to stay home, if you have some family involvement, and that's probably one of the #1 areas right now of unpaid caregiving. It's huge. The statistics on that, how many of family members are contributing to this. And this is a cost really that, really in answering this question probably was not really anything you were thinking about as part of figuring that in. But I think from a society perspective, it's a huge cost. And one of the things that I think, we as a society are trying to work out. So thanks, Mike. That was a great question.
Let me ask the last formal question of our experts today before our Q&A. So what's the one takeaway you would want our attendees to know about in helping aging adults? Sue?
Okay, I have two. I can't always just do the one, but it's just a review of what we've done. Start early, start having those conversations before they reach a crisis point, both for your parents or loved ones and also for yourself. As middle-aged adults, we really need to start having those conversations with our kids, our spouse, some friends, our parents, and then to follow up from that, as we just heard from Mary Kay and Colleen, it's a complex process. There are a lot of moving parts depending on your situation, what it is now versus what it may be down the road. And so to plan ahead and to really educate yourself and your loved ones as far as what your options are, what resources there are, what they aren't, just to really start early in both having the conversations and the education piece. I think sometimes to get a third party like Mary Kay or Colleen, they have resources that we wouldn't even be able to find if we started out and Googled, resources in Cook County or DuPage County. It's a maze. And so by having some other resources for people who do this all the time, and they have great resources. So that's a great way to start.
Thank you, Sue. Colleen?
Well, building on what Sue just said, Google is not an expert. And Google is not your friend. And I think one of the things that, if I could make one strong recommendation, is get yourself in front of a seasoned professional. And by seasoned, I mean, you've got to have somebody who's worked in the aging network no less than 5 years. Because as we've already mentioned, it's complex. So, I mean, if you are fluent in things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, VA benefits, or the differences between independent, assisted, supportive, memory care, and retirement communities and nursing homes, then have at it. Then Google around. But most people are not. And it takes at least 5 years to be able to fully understand the network and what's available to people. So that is my strong recommendation. Work with a seasoned professional. It is worth the investment to be able to get the answers that you seek. Everybody's time is precious, and so is yours. So be sure that you're putting a few dollars towards your future or your loved one's future so that you can get the right answers, reputable answers. And to build a little bit more on what Sue said too, is it's not just important to know who's doing a good job out there in the community that serves older adults, but equally important is to know who's doing a really lousy job. And your seasoned professionals will be able to help you navigate toward the people that are going to do a very good job for you, who are reputable and have been around, have seen some things and have learned from their mistakes, so they render superior services.
And as we've learned over the last 45 minutes, this is very complicated. It's very customized depending on the situation, and it's evolving too. Mary Kay, I'm sure you have something that you'd like to share that would be worthwhile.
Susan and Colleen have both said, those are the things that I would absolutely advocate for, because again, coming from an attorney's perspective, my goal is to help my clientele maintain as individuals their right to live as independently as possible for as long as they can, and with a high degree of dignity, and to maintain that dignity. And, you know, it's only by doing your homework and being prepared and having the conversations, that really is what the goal is. So the sooner and the better you do that, the better those goals are going to be able to be maintained. So, thank you, Mike.
And I'd like to, Sue?
I would like to offer up a challenge for everybody to complete an advance directive by the end of the month, or at least start it and begin that conversation. Anybody over 18, again, like they said, it just saves so much time and emotional stuff going forward.
And can I build on that, Mike?
Sure.
Because Mary Kay won't tell you this, because that's just Mary Kay. That's why we love Mary Kay. She's very good at what she does, and she's humble about it. You know, one of the things that I heard both Susan and Mary Kay talk about were the free resources that are available out there to get powers of attorney done for you or your loved one. And those are valid and available. I will tell you from an advocate standpoint, a non-attorney advocate, that, you know, the protections that are put into place through an attorney drafted power of attorney for healthcare or property are superior. Sometimes, and I used to, we did an analysis of the additional protections available on attorney drafted documents. There are 20 additional protections in an attorney drafted document. So yes, will the statutory documents do the job? Certainly they will, but an attorney drafted document is far superior to the statutory documents or the free documents available out there. So again, back to the investment, I can't say enough about it. And when you don't know what the future brings for your loved one, and none of us do, when you have attorney drafted documents that give you more decisional mobility and the ability to do things quickly and efficiently for your loved one or a vulnerable adult, it is worth it. And as somebody who steps into that role as a power of attorney, I just have to say that those attorney drafted documents are just superior. They're superior.
Thank you.
Wonderful point, you know, coming from somebody that works with the types of documents and as often as you do. You know, most people, it's like a once in a lifetime occurrence or maybe a twice in a lifetime occurrence. So, you know, for somebody that works with them all the time, that's really great advice.
And I think we all know, if you're working with the right professional and it's a quality professional, the types of conversations and questions that you're being asked, and just because of the experiences of that professional are going to be far superior to what you can do on your own independently, just trying to research something and not being able to have somebody to bounce things off of, and where experiences can be shared, and it's very valuable. So thank you to each of our three panelists today. What I'd like to be able to do now is just share a couple of slides. We put together a resources slide to give each of the attendees the ability to go out and do a little bit more sourcing of information. And so we've listed a number of resources here, and it looks like we may add one or two to the list before we distribute it. And we've also listed a contact information slide. So if you have any questions or need help addressing a particular situation, feel free to reach out to any of us. As attendees, our intent is to share the slide presentation with you, so you'll receive all of our contact information for future reference. And let's take a look at a couple of questions that we may have had just come in. The one that I'd like to start with is, how do I coordinate VA benefits with Medicaid or Medicare? And Mary Kay, I think this is something that's right up your alley.
I'd love to answer that. Great question. That is actually one of the major things and the areas that we spend some time with helping our clients. I often refer to the Medicare cliff that people experience, and that's a situation of where, in most situations, you know, once we retire, we're receiving our Medicare benefits, we're not really having any issues until, of course, we end up in the hospital and we can't go home. And that's the first time that we really become aware of the limitations of Medicare. Because what we're talking about when we're talking about Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA is we're talking about that extra types of care, like the assistance in activities of daily living, those types of things that we would not normally think of as medical care. Those are the areas of where we're looking for Medicaid and VA benefits. So the difference, so if you think about it from that perspective, you know, just kind of like a layering on top of services. So we start with our Medicare, and our Medicare takes care of our hospital and our physicians. But now all of a sudden we can't go home. Well, who's going to pay that $10,000, maybe $8,000 private pay facility rate? Well, that's where, if we run out of money, that's where we're going to look to the Medicaid system. So the Medicaid then is going to come in and cover that cost. Now, in between, there may be, if we're going into maybe an assisted living facility, and so that's where the VA benefit can come in, is that VA benefit can come in and help with some of that. But there's a big difference in the amount of money that the VA will cover and the amount and what the Medicaid covers. So the VA benefit, and there's various VA benefits, there's healthcare, there's aid in attendance and pension. So there's actually a couple of pieces to the VA program. What I'm kind of referring to is the aid in attendance. That's that extra help that you get for if someone's in like an assisted living facility. The big difference between that and the Medicaid is you have to do that in coordination, because most times when somebody's getting their aid in attendance, chances are they're going to move on to that next level of needing care. That's where the Medicaid piece is going to come in. So if you're going to be doing your application for VA benefits, you'd want to make sure you don't do anything that's going to be violate the rules of Medicaid. So if you're doing that, you have to make sure that if you're working with, and there's a lot of VA people out there that will help with that, but make sure that you're working with an elder law attorney, because they understand not only the VA, but also the Medicaid piece. So you don't want to do something to qualify for one and then get yourself in trouble for the other. So I think that that's just kind of a really brief overview without getting too far into the weeds about, you know, Medicare, VA, and Medicaid. Okay.
Thank you, Mary Kay. Here's our second question, and actually I think this will be our final question today. What's being done nationally to combat dementia and Alzheimer's disease? And Colleen, can you answer that for us?
I'd be happy to. There is a national plan to address Alzheimer's disease and other dementia types. And I'll just mention that even though Alzheimer's disease is the primary, is the most common dementia type, there really are 4 major types of dementia. And so this national plan to address Alzheimer's disease, actually the formal plan also addresses these other dementia types as well. So the goals of this national plan are to start coming up with remedies to prevent and effectively treat Alzheimer's disease. And the goal is by 2025. And also other dementia types, but optimizing quality care and trying to find non-medicinal interventions. And the fact is we've had over 200 clinical trials fail in the attempt to treat dementia. And even when people do take the 2 medications that are readily available and FDA approved to slow the progression of dementia, we know that those are, number one, only good for about 3 years, after which time they stop losing the effectiveness of the person who's taking them, if they worked for that person at all. And in fact, those medications are only really treat or show any kind of improvement for only 1/3 of our population that takes them. So that's dismal news. So where a lot of the research dollars have gone and the growth has gone in treating dementia is to come up with programs that help people stay very much engaged wherever they are in their dementia process. So having people be able to engage in meaningful activities and being able to stay sensory, very alive and well. Susan mentioned earlier, and I think you did too, Mike, about the music and older adults and the dementia brain in particular, just how much that awakens a person. So there are meaningful pursuits that we can take people down or involve them in and walk alongside them in their journey through Alzheimer's, no matter how advanced, because even a bedbound person who's nonverbal anymore still has tactile stimulation that they can benefit from, and that music can wash over them. So we shouldn't ever give up and say, well, what's the new little pill that's going to correct it? Well, the new little pills aren't coming down the pike fast enough. So really the emphasis now is on meaningful programming, sensory improvement and stimulation. And yeah, that's how we're moving to improve people's experience through their journey with Alzheimer's and other dementia types.
Thank you, Colleen, and thank you, Sue. Thank you, Mary Kay, for being and agreeing to be a panelist today, and all the information and wisdom and insights that you shared today. I'm sure the attendees found helpful. As attendees, if there's any specific information or a subject matter that you think a deeper dive would be helpful for, please just reach out to one of us and let us know. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everybody.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.